So now it is my extreme pleasure to introduce today's keynote. Jeffrey Bowyer-Chapman is most recognized for his portrayal of the ambitious producer Jay in the Peabody-winning Lifetime series Unreal. He was recently seen on American Horror Story's 9th season, Apocalypse. And Jeffrey is also known as a guest celebrity judge on the hit show RuPaul's Drag Race, and can be seen in the film Dirty Grandpa alongside Robert De Niro and Zac Efron. And I did see that last week. It was on TV. It is so funny. I loved it. So aside from all that, Jeffrey is a longtime advocate for diversity and inclusion. And this year, Jeffrey began his own podcast called Conversations with Others. He describes his mission as a safe space to be open and honest. Jeffrey says, "I'm interested in delving into the minds of others, the odd ones out, the queer kin, the biracial, the gender fluid, the outspoken, courageous, and crazy phenomenons who fall outside of the status quo, who dance joyfully in the margins of otherness, and have managed to make authentic, impactful marks against all odds." Please welcome Jeffrey Bowyer-Chapman.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so excited to be with all of you. My name is Jeffrey Bowyer-Chapman, and I am an other. I am a queer, biracial man. I was adopted as an infant at 12 days old and raised by a nice white family in the prairies of Alberta, Canada, nicknamed the Texas of the North, which should paint a fairly clear picture for you. My formative years were spent navigating my way through a world that did not accept or understand me based on all of the things that my otherness represented from an outside perspective, things that were far beyond my control. Existing without the privilege of having my elders to help guide or shepherd me through my youth, as I saw so many of my peers, my siblings, my friends, my classmates had, I was left to figure it out on my own. And the lessons that I took with me have been hard-learned, extraordinarily painful at times, but so deeply impactful and lasting that they remain to this day my primary approach to how I guide myself through this world. In many ways, those years and lessons have defined who I am. The power, those lessons are specifically what I'm here to talk with all of you about today, and the power of authentic vulnerability. I'm here to share with you how you can bring the light into every interaction you have, and how it can translate from the boardroom and PowerPoint presentations to job interviews, and most importantly, to simple, everyday exchanges you have in your own life. And as everything, it starts with working from within. It starts with you, with us. But the best way, I think, for me to share my experience with you is to tell you my story. Now, show of hands, how many of you think or know that you were the first introduction or representation of otherness or some form of intersectionality to someone close to you in your life, whether it was your family or your college roommate or your boss? Yeah? Yeah, me too. Now, I know that I have been the first representation of otherness for many people in my life because I asked them. Years ago, I asked my mother and father separately what their first exposure to gay or queer culture was. Both of their answers, independently of one another, were, "You, Jeffrey." At first, I was gagged. I could not believe that I was the first identifiably gay or queer person that my parents had ever knowingly met. What? So I wondered, who else in my life had I encountered where that was also the case? So I asked people. I asked my grandmother, same question, same answer. My 9th grade teacher, same question, same answer. I asked my siblings, same question, same answer. And then I asked my boss at the time, same question, same answer. I had been the model, the frame which within they based all of their opinions and first impressions of queer or gay people. And I'm what some white folk used to call a twofer, black and gay, 2 for 1. So I was a double whammy for many people having their first encounter with someone who embodied these two intersections of otherness. Me, little old me. Now, I could have looked at that reality as an overwhelming amount of pressure or responsibility to be a representative of all of our different intersections of otherness for the gaze of the status quo, but I chose and I choose to look at it as an extraordinary gift and blessing. To have the opportunity to bring light into every interaction I have is a responsibility as much as it is a privilege. To be able to bring this perspective or lens into our everyday lives, into our workplaces and social circles and homes is an incredible asset and could potentially shift the way the status quo exists as we now know it. I host a podcast called JBC Presents Conversations with Others, emphasis on the others. And each episode, I sit down in conversation with celebrities and influential public figures who in some way fall under the umbrella of otherness. So people of color, members of the LGBTQ community, women who march to the beat of their own drum, essentially anyone who exists outside of the status quo. And I start each episode with a pretty standard intro of who my guest is, qualified from a list of their professional achievements before they've even uttered a word. And then my first question is always the simplest and most complex question of all. Who are you? 3 of the most powerful words for communication and connection. Who are you? It's a question I've been asking my entire life. The philosopher Joseph Campbell said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." So, who am I? Past the obvious otherness that the world puts upon me by my biracial, cisgendered body, my queer spirit, my accolades, my job in the public eye, who am I? I am a lover. I am a spiritual being having a human experience. I am a seeker. I am someone who is constantly seeking the depths and the truth of the world around me, constantly seeking to find not what separates or divides us, what makes me different or better or worse than you or any other body sitting here in this room, but rather, what is the universal thread that connects us all? Now, it started out as a protective mechanism, a way to disarm people around me from a very young age so that they were able to see through my layers of obvious otherness. I knew what the world around me saw when they looked at me. So I chose to grant them access to the core of who I am. It's a deeply vulnerable place to exist, and being vulnerable is scary. It's why most people don't do it or choose not to live in that emotional state. But we, as others, are not most people. We are magic. We are the products of oppressed and marginalized groups of people who have ascended to our current positions in life, not by luck or nepotism or privilege, but the sheer will and the audacity to be ourselves. Living in that state of vulnerability is also where I have found the deepest soul connections in my lifetime have been formed, often with the unlikeliest of people. So, who are you? Who am I? Something visceral and real shifts within me upon asking that question of myself, and the sensation that takes place is deeply impactful, yet primally familiar, but I can't really put it into words, so I'm gonna put that question out there now to all of you so you can see, or rather feel, what I mean. Now, I know some of you are still eating, but if you'll all just take a minute and join me in this experiment, I promise it'll only take a few seconds and it will be painless, mostly. So, close your eyes. Take a deep belly breath in through your nose and sigh it out your mouth. And silently ask yourself, who am I? You can ask it 2 or 3 times and just pay attention to what occurs within you. Who am I? Who am I? Do you feel that? That stirring within your abdomen? Y'all can open your eyes now, by the way. that energy trickling up your spine, that inner awakening to your truest self. Now, some spiritual leaders claim that the soul resides in that very area of our bodies. And when the human embryo is being formed in the womb, the first area of our body to develop is our nervous system, our feelings, our backbone, our guts. And yet, when someone asks us who we are, we tend to answer from our heads first, and very rarely, if ever, from our soul's core. What we are all made of is the same stuff. We are all connected on a deep, intuitive level. Each one of us, a part of the collective consciousness, us, the status quo, and everyone in between. A friend of mine recently said to me that he thinks that my superpower is allowing people to be themselves, which is the ultimate compliment because it's all I've ever truly wanted or desired from anyone I encounter. The space, the freedom, and the safety to be authentically myself. Because that is when I can bring my best self. And I recognized early on in life that by granting you access to the deeper being of who I am, past the layers of otherness, it gave the schoolyard bullies less incentive to hurl cruel names at me, or the older straight white men who dominated my world and would have easily, and often did, cast me aside as the black pansy, as a series of flaws haphazardly strung together, resulting in the mistake of a person they may have previously thought of me as. It gave them the opportunity to go deeper within themselves and realize that I was not only not a threat, but just a human being, attempting to navigate my way through the world just as they are. And with our differences put aside, that openness was the key to unlocking the common connection between them and me, opening all of us up to the infinite possibilities of a new world. It is also how I have experienced the biggest life-changing breaks of my career through conscious acts of authentic vulnerability. But it took recognizing the patterns and doing the exact opposite for several painful years to really learn that lesson. Now, the entertainment industry at large is simply a microcosm of the real world. And I found I had no access whatsoever to my tribes in either reality. As a child, I never met a black bank teller or a lesbian barista or a gay bus driver. I was drowning in a sea of the status quo. Now, I was a very performative child, believe it or not, and my family had been telling me for as long as I could remember that they were going to send me to Hollywood. Now, I didn't know what Hollywood was, but my 7-year-old self believed them. And I could sense, even from that age, that I very obviously did not belong where I presently found myself. So I figured that if they thought I believed in Hollywood, I should believe them, and that is exactly where I should be. So with that seed planted in my head at such a young age, I began to consciously pay attention to which bodies were being projected to me through my TV screen. And there were none like mine. So I really was the first representation of otherness to people I encountered in my daily life because they weren't even seeing characters who were reflections of people like me on their own TV screens. So that realization prompted me from a very young age with the intention to grow up to play queer characters and become the very thing that I had been lacking and so desperately yearning for as a child. A form of representation for little boys and girls out there in the world who were just like me. And I didn't know where they were or how they even existed in the world, but I knew that if I were here and I felt the way that I did, I couldn't be the only one. I just couldn't. And you all are living proof that I was right. And I thought it was gonna be so easy to crack the code and walk that walk. Ugh, it's the naivete of youth. I was like, yo, Hollywood, what's up? Oh, didn't you hear? My family says that I belong here, so let me in and let me be as gay as I wanna be. Now, I did have some incredible beginner's luck. My first film at 21 years old, I was blessed enough to play a gay character, and also blessed enough to receive some of the most impactful advice that I've ever received to this day. On my last day of filming that movie, the director, a gay man, pulled me aside, placed his hands firmly on each of my shoulders, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "There is a void in this industry, and you are here to fill it. never compromise your integrity. Never compromise my integrity. At 21 years old, I was like, okay, I got this. I am only going to play gay characters. My next few gigs in the coming months were bit parts in queer-centric shows like The L Word and Noah's Ark, but after appearing on the only 2 queer shows known to mankind at that time, my luck dried up, and so did my bank account. And my path was long, and the road was bumpy, to say the very least. It was a solid decade of hardships, pounding the literal pavement of New York City, sleeping in bedbug and cockroach-infested apartments, jumping the subway turnstiles on days when it was a choice between, paying the subway fare to make it to an audition or feeding myself with a $2.50 falafel sandwich from Mamoun's in the East Village on St. Mark's Place. That place saved my life on many occasions. I made a choice out of circumstance and desperation that I would have to start going out for roles that were written as straight characters. I had a lot of resistance to that decision, and at the time, I couldn't really understand why it hurt my soul so badly to even pretend to be these machismo dudes saving the day and getting the girl. Many years of therapy later, I can see so clearly that it triggered me because I was being forced to do what I had to do, at times out of desperation and survival as a child, pretend to be something that I was not, a straight guy. I modified my cadence of speech, the tone of my voice, my mannerisms became rounded and slower moving. The swish in my hips became static and militant, and it was awful and so boring. Even when the director called cut and the camera stopped rolling, I did not feel safe enough to step back into my own personal authenticity and just be myself, as so many of my straight castmates had the privilege of doing. Because I could tell that as soon as I did, it made the producers and creative forces so uncomfortable. I could see it in their eyes, the worried look of whether or not they'd made a huge mistake in casting me. Would the flyover states buy that this swishy gay boy could play a straight military hunk? So I played small, and I hid all of the most precious parts of myself away in fear of losing my job or prematurely ending my career. And it was the most painful choice I had made at that time in my life. And the pain ran so deep that it forced me into a state of depression and overwhelming anxiety. The physical manifestations of dimming my own light to make other people, to make the status quo comfortable in my presence. I could feel that at best I was tolerated, but far from accepted, miles away from my original intention and vision that I held so close to my heart since childhood. And then the shift happened. I didn't see it coming, and I had no idea the impact that it would have on my life's path. After existing in a state of deep depression for nearly a year, I told my team of agents that I couldn't do it anymore. That if this is what success in this industry looked like, or more importantly, what it would feel like, then I did not want it. I told them that I was going to take a step away from acting and that I would only, from that point forward, accept roles and auditions for gay characters. I was by no means in a financial situation or at a place in my career from a success perspective that it made any sense at all to anyone but me to be making this decision. But I knew that if I kept going in the direction that I had been heading, I would slowly begin to die from the inside out. I had already begun to. Then one day, back to those years of jumping subway turnstiles to skip paying the metro fare to make it to auditions and eating those $2.50 falafel sandwiches, I got an email from my team saying, "We're not sure if this is something you'd be interested in, as the character is straight, but the script is really weird and the writing is fantastic." It was a pilot for a television series called Unreal. The critics love it too, guys. Now, written in bold at the top of the script, it said, "Co-created by Marty Noxon. Now, Marty Noxon is a name that I saw every week during the credits of my favorite TV show growing up, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yes, Buffy. Y'all are nerds like me. For reasons I will never know, as a younger teenager, whenever I would see Marty's name roll upon the screen under the credits of writer and executive producer, I would point to the television and I would say, I am going to work with you one day. I don't know why. I don't know why her name, out of all of the names in the credits, her stood out to me. In fact, at that time, I assumed that Marty Noxon was a man. But the name did stand out, and 15 years later, I was being presented with an opportunity to make that dream a reality and work with the woman herself. So, putting aside my steadfast vow to never play a straight character again, I confirmed the appointment and went in the following day to audition for Marty Noxon. The character of Jay was straight. He was sleazy, he was a womanizer, he was a hoe bag, he would sleep with all the female characters on the show. And so I honestly didn't think that I would actually book the role, but I wasn't about to pass up on an opportunity to get in front of Marty Noxon and potentially collaborate with her on future projects. You never know. So after 3 rounds of auditions over the next week and a half, I did book the role. And the creative forces of Unreal had, at that point, only ever seen me in character as Jay, so they didn't even know that I was queer. So I made the decision the day that I first stepped onto that set to do what I had never done in a professional environment of the entertainment industry before. And while in front of the camera, I would embody this straight character to the best of my ability, once the camera stopped rolling, I would be nothing but my authentically vulnerable self. I would consciously strip away the layers I had built to protect myself in situations exactly like this and choose differently. I would connect with Marty Noxon and the creative team who were largely made up of straight white men. I would show them exactly who I am, and in doing so, grant them permission to be exactly who they are as well, unapologetically so. Within months, it was announced publicly on Twitter that the pilot for Unreal had been picked up to series. So within hours, the calls started coming in from my castmates, and they were dropping like flies. The studio and the network had decided to pick the show up to series. However, they also decided to do a total overhaul, rewriting and recasting the majority of the show. As hours passed, one by one, I got phone calls from my cast members saying that they had just been fired, and best of luck to me. I remember in those terrifying hours, floating in the unknown of my career's future, reciting a prayer by Martin Luther King Jr. that has become a daily affirmation and mantra of mine for many years now. Use me, God, or Gaia, or Buddha, or universe, or life, or source, whatever sits you best. Use me. Show me how to take who I am, who I want to be, and what I can do, and use it for a purpose greater than myself. Silently repeating it to myself, sitting on the hardwood of the living room floor of my apartment in Brooklyn, until the final phone call came through, and it was Marty Noxon herself. I answered and blurted out immediately that no matter what the outcome of this phone call was, it was a dream come true to be receiving a phone call from Marty Noxon in my own home. Even though she could have been potentially just calling to fire me. This is where everything changed. She told me that not only was I not being fired, that the writers and the creative team had decided, after spending time with me, getting to know me behind the scenes, that they decided that they liked me, Jeffrey, better than the J they had written on paper in the script, so they decided to rewrite the character after me, starting with making him an openly gay man. What? The power of authenticity. Now, I couldn't tell you what happened in the next few hours because I was literally in a state of ecstatic shock, but I can tell you that I spent the next 5 years of my life playing one of the only openly gay characters of color as a series lead on a major cable show, and it changed my whole damn life. The next major shift happened about a year later when a series of events stemming from my role on Unreal led me to being invited to be a guest judge on the best reality show, potentially the best television show, period, RuPaul's Drag Race. I see you, girl. Yes, queen, yes. Which leads me to standing here with all of you today. So along with sitting on the panel for the taping of Drag Race, RuPaul, Mother Ru, also invited me to appear as a guest on his podcast, What's the Tea?, where I once again saw directly in front of me the perfect opportunity to tap into my own authentic vulnerability with the intention of being used for a purpose greater than myself. I knew that there were going to be millions of young straight kids and queer kids out there listening to my story. So instead of doing what so many actors do in interview settings like that, and what I myself had done many times out of publicity training and self-protection, I chose to tell the deeper truth of who I am. My struggles, my insecurities, my desires and intentions, an unapologetic, unself-conscious exposure of who I am. After wrapping that episode of Ru's podcast, the producer, a straight white male, pulled me aside and said that no one had ever done what I had just done on their show. And then he said that if I wanted my own podcast, that they would love to help create it and produce it. And thus was born my show, JBC Presents Conversations with Others. Thanks, guys. Subscribe, like, rate, and review. The common denominator, the conclusion that I have come to is that when we strip away all of the things that make us different, our resumes, where we're from, the color of our skin, what gender we were assigned at birth, our sexual identities, what we're left with are all of the things that make us the same, that connect us as a species. All of these seemingly random events that take place throughout the course of your lifetimes are actually priceless gems of opportunities sprinkled throughout our path to be used for a purpose greater than ourselves. But it all begins with 3 simple words. Who are you? Who am I? It is a lifelong journey of that internal search for the deeper truths of who we are that allows us access into the deeper, authentically vulnerable truths of everyone we encounter. And while stripping away the parts of us that separate us as a species, we must also remember to embrace the otherness, to celebrate your otherness, because my blackness and my queerness and my otherness is fly and fabulous. And yours is too. But you must let the truth of who you are at your soul's core be the internal guidance system, your personal GPS that will lead us all to a better, more connected world. And it seems so unfair at times that we have to be the ones to create the safe space to authentically and vulnerably expose ourselves in order to create and sustain a safe environment for change. But let's be honest, if we don't, history has shown us that the people who currently hold the keys to the castle aren't going to be the first ones to give up their place of privilege. So it has to start somewhere, and it starts with us. The work that we are doing to create positive change for social justice in this world is nothing new. It's just our turn. We are the peaceful warriors of authentic vulnerability. And in the words of Jean Houston, peace is potency. It's reaching, it's sprouting, it's planting. It's this new energy. It's people reaching out, crossing the great divide of otherness, and making connections that they never did before. We have to be willing to be vulnerable. We need to be willing to be courageous. And it's the little choices we make every day. It's those tiny, random, seemingly meaningless encounters that are our perfect opportunities to bring the light. That is how trust is built. And there is no connection without trust. And that is where the magic of evolution occurs. Now, I'm going to wrap up this conversation the same way that I sign off on each episode of my podcast. If I can leave you all with one thing, it's this: celebrate yourself and love each other. I'm JPC, and I love you. Peace. Thank you. Thank you all. Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. Thank you. Get over here. Thank you.
Oh, awesome.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Let's give him another round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Oh, that was inspirational. And thank you for bringing your authentic self and sharing
My
that
pleasure.
with
Thank
us.
you for making it a safe space for me to do so.
It's always a safe space.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to come back, we're happy back. We do have some time for a little questions and answers, or questions, if anyone has any questions for Jeffrey. And we have some mic runners running around. And
Testing.
there's our first one.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Octavio Hinojosa. I'm the Executive Director for the National Hispanic Corporate Council. So I just want to congratulate you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
But I do have a very, very important question I need to ask.
Yes.
Whatever happened to your Canadian accent? What about you're the out?
It's a really good question. I feel like in many ways I consciously beat it out of myself. Like I said, I was such an other. I was adopted by a white family and raised in this tiny little farm town of less than 2,000 people called Rimbey, Alberta. And I think I was just so consciously aware that I was so different from everyone else. I also, paid really close attention to their cadence of speech and the way that they spoke, and it didn't necessarily vibe with the person that I knew that I wanted to grow into be. So I was just very conscious to enunciate and to be, quite articulate. And I left when I was young. I left when I was 16 years old and started modeling and traveled all over the world. So I feel like I'm kind of like a Madonna in that sense. Unfortunately, that no matter where I am, I kind of tend to pick up on the accent of, you never want to see me in London. It's so embarrassing.
Other questions, right?
Hi.
Yami Taylor with Bank of America.
Hi.
I really want to walk away with you giving me one word.
Yes.
One word when I'm struggling with some of the things that you shared. What's my word I need to think of?
Oh, that is such a good question. Breathe. Breathe. What we did before, just closing your eyes and taking a moment to go into yourself, but it starts with connecting with your breath. It's a hugely powerful tool. Meditation is a practice, a tool in my bag of tricks that I pull out every day. I start every single day with meditation, just sitting and breathing with myself, whether it's a guided meditation or listening to the sounds of the world around me, like the air conditioner or whatever, just to tune out all of my thoughts to the best of my ability and just reconnect with my breath. Because when you reconnect with your breath, you reconnect with the core of who you are. So starting your day out like that, I think, is the best approach that I have found, and it's the thing that you can do whenever you feel like you need that extra boost, or you need to be that source of light for someone else out there in the world.
All right, over there.
Thank you.
Amy.
Hi, Charlotte Ratliff, Bank of America as well. I was wondering what it was after that year and a half of going to work and not being yourself. What was it that helped you say enough is enough? Was there an event or something that just helped you? Because I know a lot of people possibly in that community have a hard time getting out of it, and some of them never do. So what was it that helped you do that?
Well, like I touched on briefly, it really was a depression. I fell into a depression. I think that I'm naturally quite a light, bright, happy person, and I wasn't that person anymore. I was a dim version of myself, and it didn't feel good. Not only did it not feel good, it felt so painful just to get up every day and to have to step back into that inauthentic version of myself. It hurt, and I knew that I wasn't helping myself, I wasn't serving myself, and I wasn't helping anyone else out there by bringing this half version of myself into every room that I walked into. So at that time, it's when I first discovered spirituality and meditation and self-awareness and self-love. I started reading some really great material by Louise Hay, Marianne Williamson, Dr. Wayne Dyer, listening to Oprah. and Maya Angelou, reading James Baldwin, really just reconnecting, connecting to that spiritual world, and also, reading great, I was living in New York at that time, so I had a lot of time to read. So I read like some really great literature by like the Black greats that I had no access to when I was a kid. It was all new to me. So like Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, and I read their stories, and I could see, through their memoirs, their autobiographies, that they were extraordinary human beings who had accomplished extraordinary things, but had started from very humble beginnings and had a really hard time on their life's path getting them to where they were wherever at that point they were in their story in the book. And I realized that you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be flawless in order to achieve your dreams and achieve your goals. It's just I think that so many of us have a hard time getting to where we want to get to because we don't actually have a destination point in mind. And that's what I was saying earlier about like the GPS system. You have to let your feelings and your emotions and the inner core of who you are guide you, but you also have to have a destination in mind, right? When you get in your car, if you just put in, the GPS isn't gonna tell you where to go unless you put in a destination. So, we don't always have to know how we're gonna get there, but as long as you have like that seed planted of what is my desired intention, what is my desired end goal, I think that was key. That was key for me, so just getting clear on that.
All right, Bobby.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Jess Herbst. I'm a transgender woman.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that, like you, growing up, there was nobody on TV that I could look up to. As a matter of fact, the only person in media that even felt at all like me that I thought was, I think his name was Norman Bates.
Wow.
And then he was replaced by the person in Silence of the Lambs making a girl suit. So I had no good representation. So this really isn't a question, it's just a thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Being yourself in the media is going to help every child, every person who is another, and it's wonderful.
Thank you. You just gave me chills. I mean, really, thank you. I mean, it's, you are doing the work just as I am, as if all of you are doing the work just as you are.
One question over here, Sharon. Up, over there.
Thank you. Thank you for being authentically yourself. And in many ways, I'm sure that we are the first representation of otherness to many people we meet. So by being as bright as you are, as I can feel you from here, I know that any room you walk into, anyone that you encounter, anyone in that space is going to be blessed just to meet you. Thank you.
Hi, Andy DiPolito from NGA. I want to say thank you for the wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I have to ask on behalf of my wife if I can get a picture with you.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I know, selfless plug, but when she found out that you were going to be here and she's in St. Louis, I'm here at Walt Disney World with you. I didn't come home with the picture, I was going to get hit.
Oh, you're so sweet. It would be my pleasure. Hi.
Hi, I'm Sharon. So I do have a London accent, so I'm keen to hear yours.
Yeah. You don't want to, trust me.
Thank you for just being so authentic in your speech. I loved Unreal's fantastic show. My question is a bit random. So if you were to write a book, what would you call it and what would some of the chapters be?
Ooh, that is such a great question. If I were to write a book, what would I call it? Well, no, I do have an idea in mind because I wanted to, like years ago in my early 20s, I was like, after reading like the memoirs of like Maya Angelou and James Baldwin, and my friends telling me that my superpower was like allowing people to be themselves and connecting with people, and that's what people have told me for years. I wanted to call my first book, like my first memoir, Me Too, but I can't call it that anymore for very obvious reasons. It's not funny, but it's kind of funny. What are some of the chapters that I would call them? What an interesting question. Oh my God, I don't even know where to begin with that. I mean, my tagline, what I say in my podcast, celebrate yourself and love each other, would definitely be it. Coming home to yourself, authentic vulnerability. All, like those are all the words that are just coming to mind for me. But what an interesting question. I am actually going to sit on that one and write it down in my journal and figure it out for myself. Thank you for making me think. That was such a great question. Hi.
Hi, my name is Natasha Tyler. I work for Department of Homeland Security, ICE.
Hi.
More recently.
I have my green card. I'm Canadian, but
Perfect.
Okay.
So my question is, with you being your authentic self and really putting yourself out there, how do you feel the culture is changing in Hollywood's perspective?
Oof. Well, I mean, I can't take any credit for it, but certainly in the past couple of years, what I have noticed is that it's a lot less lonely out there. There are, I can think of it from just from my perspective. So auditioning, for example, when I would go into rooms and audition for characters, if they were written as black characters or as queer characters, I would walk in and there would be 2 or 3 other actors in the room, maybe. And if they were queer characters, those actors weren't even gay, mostly. And if they were black characters, sometimes they were Latino, sometimes they were, Arabic. There was a lot less options, I think, and people were not as comfortable claiming their otherness. And now, when I walk into an audition or a room, there's like 20 folk who look like me, which is wonderful. It's a blessing in many ways, because I look at this new generation of kids who are coming up, these young queer kids who own themselves and are so comfortable in their own skin and so comfortable with their naming their own identities, from like asexual, pansexual, gender nonconforming, genderqueer, gender non-binary, all of the above, trans, all of the above. It's such a beautiful thing. I look at this generation who is coming up. There's so many of them. There's this new crop of kids, and then there's kind of this gap in between. There's like the older generation of with RuPaul and some other older gay icons. But I mean, so much of it has to do with the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s that we just lost an entire generation of gay men who a lot of black gay men to this, horrific disease. And then, also, I mean, I can get into it for so many different, mass incarceration in America. We lose so many of our black fathers. So there's this whole generation that is around my age where there's this gap. And I feel very blessed that I had the opportunity to play queer characters in my early career, and I continue to do so. But I also recognize the power in using my own voice for a purpose greater than myself, as opposed to reciting the words from a script. That's wonderful, and there's power and validity in that, but there's so many young kids who are coming up who want it so badly and are perfectly capable of booking those roles and playing those characters and being a representative to the world in a way that I wish I could have been and what I so badly wanted when I was a kid. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I hope that that it just it spreads change throughout the world, because it's, being queer or an other in the entertainment industry is one thing. It's great because it really does reach across the masses. It reaches worldwide. But the most important thing from my own experience in creating safe space for change is just by being you in each and every single interaction that you have in your daily life, and bringing that light and tapping into that place of authentic vulnerability. And it's terrifying, like I said, but once you start to see the results of it and the connections that you make, you'll never go back. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Last question right here.
Okay, I get to be the last one. I'm actually a mother of a child that has recently come out as gay.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
And you mentioned telling your grandma, and she's actually afraid to tell my mother, my mother and father. I keep telling her, we'll do it if you want to, right? But you've made a distinction between queer and gay, and I know this is a group of people that are supporting diversity and inclusion, but I know a lot of us are big organizations that might not be. So how do we... First of all, when you talk about language, my mom actually said to my daughter not about a month ago, they ruined the word gay for me, not knowing that my child is gay or identifies as gay. So I have 2 questions. The first one is, you talk about queer and gay. What is the difference? And then you just talked about a whole slew of other terms that many people like me, over 50, white, might not be familiar with.
Yes.
And how do we socialize that? How do we bring it to our organizations to make it not the foreign thing to talk about? How do we make it part of our culture?
That is such a great question. I mean this in the least condescending way possible. Google. Really, Google. Empower yourself. Teach yourself. You know, I feel like it's so, in so many ways, I'll get into this, but in so many ways I feel like it's, as I discussed in my talk, sure, it's the power of authentic vulnerability and being yourself as an other, and it's a lot of, does feel like a lot of responsibility at times to be the ones to have to constantly like lay it out and explain it for the status quo. Sometimes it's a blessing and a gift, sometimes it's just like, crack a book, you know, like Google it. When it comes to the terms I'm using, queer and gay, so I grew up identifying myself as gay, and then in recent years, I've started identifying as queer, and queer is a term that was used, you know, it was like an offensive term for many, many years. It was like the N-word for many years, and it's a word that, that people in the LGBTQ community have reclaimed and have taken the power back from it and taken the sting out of it and use it as a word of pride. And the reason why I started identifying as queer is because I realized a few years ago, to be totally honest with you, that I am not only attracted to cisgendered men, but I'm also attracted to trans men. So therefore, I'm like, oh, I'm not just gay. I guess that there, you know, there's a spectrum of sexuality. There's gay, straight, bisexual, everything in between. And I realized, oh, I'm not just like super far on the left of on the gay spectrum. I guess I am somewhere in here. You know, learning about the spectrum of sexuality can really empower you. Learning about the spectrum of gender is hugely empowering and so fascinating. I mean, we talk about the spectrum of sexuality all the time, but people don't really talk about the spectrum of gender. And it was through reading somebody who I am blessed enough to be dear friends with, Janet Mock. She's a transgender author, activist, writer, producer, director. She's a goddess. Her first memoir, Redefining Realness. It's a story that's like, you know, very similar in the flow of like a Maya Angelou type tale, but it is an edutainment. It is so educational and it really lays it out for you, the spectrum of gender. So reading literature, really exposing yourself to new ways of being and new ways of thinking. Like if something comes up on your Netflix that's recommended for you, you're like, I would never normally watch that, watch it and just check it out and see. You know, watch TED Talks. It really is about empowering yourself. I don't think there's any one direct route that anyone is going to take necessarily to get there, but in regards to your child and, you know, being fearful of coming out to their grandmother, my gosh, I mean, the only thing that I can say to that is that hopefully their grandmother can look into your child's eyes and see the core of who they are and recognize that they are the exact same person that they were 5 minutes before they came out. It's the exact same human being that they've always been, that their grandmother has known and loved since birth, and to let that be enough to put the otherness aside and just love each other from the cores of who we are.
All right.
Is that
Thank
it?
you.
That's it? Okay, wonderful.
Thank you
you all so much for having
Thank
me.
you,
I really appreciate
Jeffrey.
it. Thank you.
We could listen to you all day long. We would love to. We'll have to think of ways to collaborate and bring you back.